Sport fishing has its own definition. You have line that will break at 120 pounds pressure. And you have 1,000 feet of it out there, and you have an 800-pound fish, and he's on the line for 8 hours. Think about the probability. Anything can happen. That's why quite often you're not going to get the fish into the boat. With Charlie Mayo, quite often you would get the fish in the boat, but you would earn it.
I got a call from the man I worked with, Mr. Martindale, and said that Charlie Mayo was looking for a mate. He said, would you like to work for Charlie Mayo for one summer? I said, oh my God, it's a dream come true.
They were referred to as horse mackerel at the time, and no one thought they had any value, and he saw the challenge in wanting to go out with rod and reel to take on a giant. Yeah, Charlie Mayo definitely had it down. He definitely knew what had to be done. He definitely trusted his crew. He believed in them, and that mantle weighed heavily on them.
He had the instincts he could tell not only about the fish, but the weather, when the weather was going to change, that the wind could move from one direction to another and would be way out of the sight of land. He wouldn't even need to look at the compass. He had the instincts of where he had been at every moment.
I think he truly was an environmentalist. He wasn't a trained environmentalist, but he understood the sea. He had this odd, almost, I've read a little of Native Americans, and they had an interesting approach towards the prey, towards the deer that they killed. And he had very much the same one. When we'd have a 500-pound tuna coming close to the boat that we'd been fighting rod and reel sport fishing, he would say, look at that animal. That animal doesn't want to give up. And it was mournful.
Yeah, I would say that every year that Charlie Mayo fished, he was a highliner. Charlie Mayo would almost always bring back a fish when the other people didn't.
He was just my grandfather, and I think that as I grew older and he had passed away, and I learned more about him as a fisherman and as a member of the community. And I remember over years, whether it was working down on the dock as I started to fish commercially in the 90s, a few years after he passed away, on draggers and different boats. Being on the dock, I remember, I'd be, oh, that's Charlie's grandson, or, Stormy's son, and, people would talk about him.
Charlie Mayo never raised his own flag. He never ever bragged, never ever heard him brag about anything. And he was always very direct and very kind to the other captains on the radio, understanding that most of them may or would likely lose their fish or whatever, but never really offering advice either,
And he didn't want anybody to know exactly how he was doing. He was afraid they'll go on another boat and they'll tell people. And so up until the 60s, we would launch these baits and troll them across the surface, and many of these were friends of his, and they knew it was a trick, so they wouldn't say much about it. So we were pretty good for a long time.
Two of the secrets that were shared with me was, first, there's a certain ecology in bait that people don't need to know, they don't need to think about, but we thought about it all the time. We thought about nothing else. When you have multiple species in the water at the same time, there's a pecking order among species. Squid will always chase and try and kill mackerel. Mackerel will always run from squid. So when you see boats putting a rig in the water that has squid up front and mackerel chasing the squid, you know they're never going to see a fish.
We were catching fish at a remarkable rate, big fish, with amateurs handling the rod and reel, so they didn't really know exactly how to do it sometimes. And we were catching 400, 500, 600-pound fish, sometimes several in a day, using amateurs who couldn't reel them in. But he had a technique to get them to bite.
A fish isn't going to get to the 1,000 pounds by being stupid. You know, the stupid ones are weeded out earlier on. Fish comes up, they've got an eye the size of this coffee cup, and they're giving something a good look. If they see thread, colors of thread different than the fish, or the fish isn't moving right, you know, they're going to back off.
He was just a natural, he was just a leader because, you know, to be honest with you, we would have like 10 or 12 boats following us all the time because they knew that wherever he went, that they should be going too. We had to try to sometimes sneak off a little bit ourselves to get a little breathing space.
They would try to run their boat right over our baits, which were being dragged at the surface. So he got into the business of, as soon as a boat was coming towards us, he'd just stop our boat and the baits would all drop and they couldn't see him.
The crew on the Cheney 3 always kept the padlock on the bait box so no one could see what was being used. And it was a cult. It was a cult that was, I guess it was based around bait. But really it was based around much more than that. It was based around trying to honor these giant fish in a way where only if you understood them were you going to get close to them.
He worked so hard at it too. We had people who chartered with our boat, came back year after year after year. People from multimillionaires to 6 or 7 guys who put in $15 a piece.
And we were trolling. It was a flat, calm, quiet day. Lo and behold, the float plane came gliding in with their propellers feathered, so we could have heard them if our engines weren't going. And the float plane landed on the baits before my father could stop the boat. And the guy got out on the pontoon, and as the bait started to drop, he looked down. That night, my father called Sports Illustrated, who had a standing message to him: if you ever want to tell what the trick is, we'll send out people on the boat. And he called them up and said, send up your writers. He stopped enjoying fishing when the numbers of tuna dropped because of equatorial Atlantic fishing that was out of control. Tuna were being slaughtered, sometimes for cat food, and they were being seined, and he really lost his stomach for it. Fishermen do feel something for their prey. I imagine even a lobsterman feels something about a lobster, and it's more than just a dollar bill.
Well, it reminds me, I sent him a letter 6 or 7 years after I had finished being his mate, and I just told him, you know, that my experience with him was, you know, second to none.
I think anyone that knew him hopefully realized it was an honor. If you knew Charlie Mayo, it was an honor.